Welcome, everyone. This is Recovery Dharma. My name is Julia, and I'm one of the facilitators in the Spokane Sangha. I'm so happy to be here with you today to share in these beautiful Buddhist practices and principles, not only as a support for my own recovery and my own understanding of my habit energy, but as a practice to actually bring me in closer communion with my own Buddha nature. And my Buddha nature, like your Buddha nature, is full of compassion and peace, love, wonder, and joy. I'd like to share with you a sentiment of metta. Metta is loving kindness, and this one was made by a community member many of us know, whose name I'll share during the community time. But this was hand painted by them. It says the word equanimity on it. Equanimity is one of the limitless qualities that we practice in Buddhism. Another word for equanimity would be inclusivity. Thich Nhat Hanh liked to use the word freedom, because when we are equanimous, when we have that capacity to hold the good, the bad, the neutral, all within a harmonized nature, we feel a sense of deep spiritual freedom. This one reads, "May I be fearless while afraid." May I be fearless while afraid. I really love this sentiment. And one of the reasons why I love it is there was a time in my life where I felt so defensive, so self-protected, that any little threat would just activate that defensive posture. So somebody would say to me, you don't have to be afraid. And I'd be, what are you talking about? I'm not afraid. And yet, behind the scenes of all of that, I was terrified. I was panicked and maybe even ashamed of feeling terrified and panicked. And I didn't want anyone to see that. So I denied its presence. And in denying its presence, what I didn't know at the time is that I was denying a piece of myself. And this manifested in all kinds of ways. And now I've learned with the practice of equanimity to create space for fear to be present. It is a teacher for me now. It is an opportunity for me to tell myself, Julia, wow, would you look at this? You're afraid. You're panicked. What's going on here? So rather than trying to pretend it didn't exist, I now cultivate some curiosity of asking, why are you visiting me? I'm not craving. I'm not anxious. I'm not depressed. I'm not using. I'm not engaging my habit energy. These are all the voices of denial, right? And it's so very human. And so it requires a degree of fearlessness to be able to say, this is difficult for me to admit. I'm afraid to admit I'm working with a craving. I'm afraid to admit that I'm working with some confusion. It's hard for me to admit that my mind is distorted. And to be able to say those things is an expression of fearlessness. That's the sentiment. That's the motivation of this particular sentiment of metta. And it plays beautifully in the work that we have been exploring, the work of Shantideva, an 8th century monk who created a classic. And it's called A Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. Shantideva was a real person. He was a Buddhist monk. And at the time, he was a student at the world's only Buddhist university in India. And he was a bit of a rebel, which I really appreciate. He was a free thinker and he was brilliant. And what he endeavored to do was to experience these Buddhist practices, these Buddhist debates, but to determine for himself how those perspectives, how those practices come alive in him. And so he created this map, as he liked to call it, this guide for himself on how to be a bodhisattva. A bodhisattva is a person who intentionally remains here, present to the suffering of the earth and all of its life, committed to trying to alleviate it by virtue of one's own practice. We are so fortunate that we get to have access to a translation of this. And this particular translation comes to us from a Geshe Khalsang Gyatso. And the chapter we have been exploring recently, in recent weeks, that is chapter number 6, called Relying on Patience. And tying patience to the sentiment of metta that sets the motivation for our practice today is it takes patience to be able to unlearn and decondition ourselves from the habit energy of being defensive, the habit energy of being self-protected, the habit energy of feeling so sensitive and perceiving everything as a threat. It takes a lot of patience to cultivate the conditions for fearlessness. And that's why we're here. Today, I'd like to read several verses. I'd like to remind everybody that this is ancient language. And so I'll provide a little bit of transliteration at the end. Take a moment. Arrive to this practice. Allow the body the pleasure of breathing. See if you can soften the mind and allow the wisdom from many, many, many centuries ago that has its cultural roots and its anthropological rhythms. And let's see if we can find its applicability here in this modern present moment. These are the words of Shantideva. If someone were to harm us with a stick or weapon, we would normally become angry with the person. But since his intent is governed by anger, it is really towards that anger we ought to direct our wrath. In such situations, maybe we could think in the past, I have harmed others in a similar manner. Therefore, maybe it is fitting that I, who caused harm to others, is now experiencing such harm myself. Friends, this is the basic principle of karma. The situations, the things that we experience in this moment may reflect situations of the past. And this is an oversimplified statement of karma, but it's something that Shantideva is asking us to simply consider. He writes, the physical suffering I experience is caused by both the stick and my body. But since the stick comes from my assailant and the body from me, with which of these should I get angry? Blinded by craving and ignorance, I've taken this form, the basis of human suffering, which can hardly bear to be touched. So with whom should I get angry when it is hurt? Although we childish beings have no wish for suffering, we are greatly attached to its causes. Thus, the harm we receive is entirely our fault. What reason is there to blame it on others? Just as with the guardians of hell, the forest of razor sharp leaves, and so forth, my sufferings in this life result from my actions. So with whom should I be angry? Although those who harm me are provoked into doing so by my own karma, it is they who will take rebirth in hell as a result. So is it not I who harm them? By depending upon them as my objects of patience, I can purify many non virtues. But by depending upon me as their object of anger, they will fall for a long time into hellish states of suffering. Thus, since it is I who inflict harm on them and they who benefit from me, why, unruly mind, do you distort things so by becoming angry with them? If I maintain this positive view, I shall not create the cause to be reborn in hell. But although I protect myself through the practice of patience, the same effect will not ripen on others. Then, would it not be better to return their harm? No, Shantideva says, retaliation would not protect them. It would just cause my bodhisattva vow to degenerate and destroy my practice of patience. It's really important to acknowledge when something arises within us that we don't necessarily agree with, and to really take that for a spin. So, for instance, this line that says, the harm we receive is entirely our fault. I have a hard time subscribing to that. That is an absolute kind of perspective that ruffles my feathers. And so it's something that I sit with. And again, entirely my fault seems like one extreme, and not my fault at all seems like the other extreme. And somewhere in the middle is where I want to land. And so, this notion that everything that happens to me is directly because of my own actions in some past life, this can't ever really be explained. So, it's not always helpful. And in fact, it can lead to spiritual bypassing and victim shaming. So when somebody is the victim of very serious harm, very serious abuse, very serious neglect, it's not helpful to say, oh, well, this is just your karma ripening. Be glad. Be glad. It's your karma ripening. Something in the past that you did is now coming to fruition. And isn't that great? Ew, no, no, not helpful. Not helpful in the immediacy of the moment. But over time, with this practice of patience, what Shantideva is also encouraging is take the time to look deeply. Take the time to look at what happens when you feel harmed by someone, when you are harmed by someone. Where are you projecting your anger? Are you projecting your anger and blame toward the person? Are you internalizing the harm and therefore projecting blame toward yourself? Are you taking on that harm and then adding harm by simply abusing yourself, returning to maybe a habit energy that isn't good for you? The invitation is to explore, what is my reaction to being harmed? Can I acknowledge that there might be something going on here related to karma that I can't fully understand? Can I entertain that the harm I'm receiving may reflect harm that I too am capable of inflicting? Is that even a possibility worth exploring? Can I do that? Can I cultivate the fearlessness to ask that question? And the answer is a resounding yes, provided we can cultivate equanimity. I have the capacity to engage in positive actions. I have the capacity to engage in negative actions. I have the capacity to engage in neutral actions. And so when somebody is being harmful toward me, antagonistic toward me, that's actually very alive for me right now. I am dealing with an antagonist, and I can see how it is my karma ripening because I have a very strong antagonistic archetype. And that antagonist in me is incredibly sharp, quick, smart, brutal. To fearlessly admit that to you diffuses its power. If I were to keep that to myself, I would stoke its power. But by voicing it out loud, by allowing some space for vulnerability, I reduce its power. And that in turn allows me an opportunity to decrease that antagonistic presence in my life and create a space for someone who is wiser, more understanding, and more curious. But to do that takes a lot of patience and a whole lot of practice. So let's take a moment of silence and let's fearlessly ask some questions. See if you can invite a situation. Something fairly obvious and easy is what I would encourage. But say you're having to deal with something a little unpleasant. Can you see how maybe you have participated in creating the conditions for the arising of that unpleasantness? And if you can see that and you can admit it, can you do so without shaming, without judgment? Can you do so with a kind of like a neutral observance? Yeah, I did that. No excuses, no diminishment. And in that recognition, can I create space to do something different, something better? Can I create the conditions to learn something here? Let's take a few minutes and explore that together. Friends, let's end our practice by repeating this beautiful sentiment of loving kindness. May I be fearless while afraid. Dedication of merit. Ooh, one of the things I want to remind everybody about working with equanimity is even when we're feeling resistance to something, like we have that arising, oh no, I'm feeling aversion. Equanimity is not about not feeling aversion. Equanimity is about that awareness of, oh, I'm feeling aversion. Okay, how can I feel this and stay steady? How can I feel this discomfort, this confusion, this bewilderment, and stay in integrity? That's the equanimous practice. It's not about not feeling certain things. And so, one of the things I'd like to share with us today for our dedication of merit is a very famous poem, I guess, from Williamson, I beg your pardon, Marianne Williamson. And so take a moment, come back to yourself, maybe even put your hand on your heart if that feels comfortable. And I'm going to read this for you, and I'm going to read it with great intentionality. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We were all meant to shine as children do. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our fear, our presence automatically liberates others. This, my friends, is Buddha nature. And I encourage you to be patient as you awaken to your magnificence. I encourage you to be patient as you cultivate the conditions for fearlessness while feeling afraid. I encourage patience as you unlearn the suspicious nature that shrouds our capacity to be joyful and kind. I hope you go into this day feeling the warmth of this community, this wisdom, and may it radiate and touch so many people in ways you may never know. Have a wonderful day today, friends. We'll see you next time. Namaste.